What is going on, YouTube? Joe here with Color Nation Media, and we are here together today to discuss Smogon's tier shifts for May 2015. Now, there's a whole bunch of them, and that's precisely why I wanted to make this video, just so we could discuss the impact that all of this is going to have on the different metas, each tier individually, and then each Pokemon individually as well. So I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do this, but I decided to ask on Twitter if people wanted to see a video, or if you just wanted me to kind of ignore it or mention it in a separate video or something. And people overwhelmingly said they would like a video discussing things. So I'm going to see what I can do about that. But yeah, like I said, we're going to discuss each thing individually, and we'll go from there. I mean, hopefully that'll open some nice discussion in the comment section below about where you think certain Pokemon may belong or not belong, or whether you think Pokemon are going to still be moving around, maybe get banned to a certain BL now that they have fallen, or I don't know. Whatever your opinion is, feel free to share it below. I'm going to share my opinions, and it doesn't mean that anyone has to necessarily agree with mine, but at least it is a nice starter for some discussion, basically. So for those of you that aren't not as familiar with the system, basically how this works with tier shifts is every 3 months we have a very large tier shift like this. So the last time that we had one like this was in February. The 2 months that are in between, we have something that's called quick rises, quick changes. And basically what that means is the cutoff is a lot higher. So for something to move up from UU to OU, for example, during those quick rise months, the percentage of usage has to be a lot higher. But when we get to the large tier shift where all these things are changing, the cutoff is a little bit lower. So that allows more things to move around a little bit. And basically that's just going to be in effect until things get balanced, and they're not done suspecting things in OU yet. I'm sure they're not done suspecting things in the lower tiers as well. Things like Salamence in UU, for example, probably needed to be suspect. Not necessarily saying that it needed to be banned, but a suspect test is always nice for certain things. So that's basically how it works. I'll also leave in the description below a link to the thread where all of these Pokemon are listed, and you can see it kind of all in front of you in one place, because I'm going to be going at it individually. So yeah, that's pretty much that. So without further ado, let's start with OU. So not a lot is changing in the OU tiers. We only see 3 new additions to the tier, and Tornadus T was already BL, so that doesn't really count as too much of a change to begin with. But Hippowdon and Alakazam are both moving from UU up to OU, so that's not really surprising to me. If anything, I was more surprised when they both went down to UU from OU in the first place. But yeah, I think that's the right move for both of them, to be honest. Hippowdon recently has seen its usage skyrocket in OU. If you've been playing it, it's just all over the place. Really at all sections of the ladder, to be honest. And that's because it's got so many things that it can do to support its team. It can obviously phase things with Whirlwind or Roar. It has the ability to set up hazards and Stealth Rock. It doesn't have to invest in one of its defenses. It can pick one, or it can do mixed bulk. It's great if you invest in its special defense, becomes a great mixed wall, or nearly unbreakable on the physical side if you do invest in physical defense. So yeah, it's just got a lot of things that it can do, and on top of that, it can set up sand for things like Sand Rush Excadrill, which is a huge threat in the tier, and that's also good for breaking, sashes and sturdies and just getting some chip damage. You can give it Smooth Rock, you can give it Lefties, you can give it Rocky Helmet. It just has so many options, and I think it really does belong in OU, so I'm expecting it to stay there for a while. As for Alakazam, I'm not sure if it's going to stay or not. We're talking about just regular Alakazam, by the way. The Mega was already BL, and I don't see that changing at any point. Regular Zam is it's good against so many different playstyles, and I think that's part of what's so good about it, because you can give it a sash, and it won't be broken by hazards or any type of passive damage like Will-O-Wisp or Toxic, because of Magic Guard. So you have to hit it twice. It's fast, it hits hard, it's got pretty decent coverage with Focus Blast and Shadow Ball. So not a lot of things would like to switch into Alakazam. So I guess that's part of the problem. But it also gets things like Encore, which is great for teams that like to set up with like sword stance, whatever, or defensive teams that try to recover or are trying to spread toxic around your team. So Alakazam is just so good at doing what it does, which is a lot of different things. It can even run Calm Mind if you really wanted it to. It doesn't exactly have the bulk to set up, but it does force switches, which means you do often get a free turn to be able to set up a Calm Mind. And I've even seen dual screen sets, although I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to be using Zam. I guess it can work if you really structure your team around it. So basically what I'm saying here is I have to agree with all of these changes to OU, and by all I mean all three of them, or two of them, I guess, 2.5. Is Tornadus T, obviously it definitely belongs OU. It's got, what is it running now? Assault Vest and Life Orb, I think, are the most common sets. It's got the Regenerator and just the singular flying typing, which is actually pretty good. It doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. Obviously it's weak to rocks, but it hits like a truck. On rain teams, it's especially dangerous because it can just fire off those 100% accurate stab hurricanes, which really does hurt a lot. It's got U-turn, so it can get momentum. It can just do so many different things, I guess. So very similar to Alakazam. So yeah, I have to say I agree with all these things. I don't want to spend too much time with OU, so we're going to move to the tier where most of the action as far as the tier shift changes are happening, and that is going to be UU. Lots of changes are taking effect for UU as 10 new Pokemon are being added to the tier this month. First of all, Dragalge was sitting in BL2, so it's not really surprising to see its usage bumped up. Since it got adaptability, its offensive presence has increased dramatically. And just to give you an idea of its power, Standard Defensive Fortress has a 62% chance of getting O-Code by Specs Draco Meteor after Stealth Rock. That's a resisted hit, ladies and gentlemen, so that's just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, it's basically a nuke. Normal Gallade is dropped from OU, which is great because it isn't really viable in the current OU meta anyway. It can still do a lot of things like Sub Swords Dance, Bulk Up, Scarf, Assault Vest, and it has relatively good coverage with its Stabs, Knockoff, Ice Punch, and Poison Jab. I think does it get Iron Head? It might get Iron Head too. But I think it'll ultimately settle in RU after a few months from now. After all, it was RU to begin Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and the Mega is what bumped it up. So that is that. Doublade moved up from RU, and that really isn't surprising because of its great typing, natural defensive bulk, 3 immunities, and its access to priority and Shadow Sneak. This thing is a problem for a lot of teams and usually requires wearing it down with status and hazards over the course of the match anyway. I'm thinking that Doublade will stay UU. So moving on, we have Heliolisk, which also moved up from RU. So the Lizard has really come a long way from its NU days of a few months ago. It's not really the most powerful thing around, but its coverage decimates many things that while it stabs. So, you know, Thunderbolt really hurts a lot of the ghost types that would try to switch into a Hyper Voice, and Grass Knot or Surf often OHKO a lot of the ground types trying to block an electric type move. And not only that, but Dry Skin also means that Pokemon like Suicune will barely be able to scratch it. It's going to have to rely on things like Ice Beam, which is not going to be doing that much anyway. So the Lizard is likely here to stay. Slurpuff moved up from RU pretty much just for the Belly Drum set, as the Calm Mind set really isn't as common as it used to be. Basically, it just sets up a Belly Drum and then play roughs everything while drain punching the Dark and Steel types that would resist the play rough. It still struggles against poison types, but at +6, Drain Punch and play rough still do a lot of damage, and in some cases can still KO, especially if there are hazards on the field. Not really an exciting Pokemon to see in action because it always does the same thing, but it is perfectly capable of sweeping entire teams. So I'm thinking that UU will be a decent home for it. One of the more surprising changes is Mamoswine's drop from OU. Although, if you've been keeping an eye on the usage stats recently, Mamo has been hovering around the cutoff for a few months now, so I guess it's really not that surprising. This is one of the few changes that I'm not really too fond of. I think Mamo might be a bit too much for UU, with its good typing, large offensive presence, and priority in Ice Shard. But on the other hand, though, I think that Salamence deserved a suspect a while ago, and Mamo provides a great check for that. I can very easily see Mamoswine going to BL. and I can also see it rising back to OU if Dragon Spam becomes more popular in OU, which it could with Mamoswine gone. Either way, Mamo's still going to be perfectly viable in OU. I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on its usage. Mandibuzz also dropped from OU in a somewhat less surprising shift, at least for me. I've been saying for a few months now that Mandy was probably going to be dropping, and its time has finally come. So it's a great mon, but its usage has really been on the decline ever since Aegislash was first banned about a year ago. Mandy will probably stay in UU unless Aegislash actually rejoins the meta, which I'm not expecting it to. In UU, it will make for a good defogger and a taunter to stop Suicune and newcomers like Slowking and Cresselia with their Calm-Mind shenanigans. Speaking of which, both of those Pokemon have moved up from RU, and neither one should be a surprise. RU could use a few less fat things anyway, and since UU is a much more balanced tier, it's probably for the best that they both moved up. Slowking has seen a lot of UU usage for an especially long time now, and has a bunch of different viable sets from Calm Mind to Assault Vest. It's defensive. You could run specs if you wanted to. It can do a lot of things. Has good coverage as well. As far as Cresselia is concerned, it will probably be more of the same, which is just being annoying, basically. Status spreading with T-Wave and Toxic, Calm Mind, and Looter Dance to restore teammates will likely continue to be common. Not much else to touch on here, really. They're pretty straightforward Pokemon, but they're probably a little bit too good for RU. Not necessarily worthy of a ban, but I can definitely see why the usage stats are the way they are there. Last but not least, we have Abomasnow rising to RU, and of course, bringing its Mega along with it. Its offensive presence will be a force in UU, just like it was in RU, with its ability to attack on both the physical and the special sides, Priority and Ice Shard that can cut down the big threats like Salamence, and then of course it's got Swords Dance to boost its attack power as well. Not only that, but Fire and Steel types like Entei that might want to try to switch in on one of its stabs can get smacked in the face with an EQ, and that's not going to feel too good. So, and even Sash users or Sturdy users that might try to live a hit often cannot because of hail damage. The only exception would be Alakazam, but that moved up to OU, so that's not even an option anymore. Yeah, I'm expecting it to stay UU. I think it's going to be a great home for Mega Snow Tree. So with that being said, that's going to be it for what we have to say about UU, so it's time to take a look at the RU changes. Not nearly as many changes are taking place in RU, but they're all fun changes for the most part. Camerupt and its Mega are one of two rises from NU, but this one is a worthy one. Mega Camerupt was banned in NU anyway in the last suspect test, but that's because of its ridiculous power backed by sheer force. Most of the common RU stall teams will have a very hard time dealing with Mega Camel because it is so hard to switch into. Slowking and Crest were two of the viable switch-ins, but now they're gone from the tier. So almost everything in the tier is 2-hit KO'd by either Fire Blast or Earth Power. Even fully specially defensive, calm-natured Alomomola is 2-hit KO'd by Earth Power after Stealth Rock. So, and if it's running Rocky Helmet, it's just 2-hit KO'd even without the Stealth Rock, I believe, because I think the lefties makes up the difference. But it wouldn't surprise me at all to see a suspect of Mega Camerupt in the future. But for now, it's definitely not going back down to NU. I mean, it was banned anyway, so I don't even know why I said that. But you get my picture. 3 dragons are moving down from UU in Noivern, Flygon, and Kingdra, and it's about time, as all of them were underwhelming in UU, especially because they are hard-pressed to deal with one of the most common Pokemon in the tier in Florges. Noivern has some options that will be great for use in RU, particularly the Taunt and Roost set. With its speed, it can pretty easily shut down a lot of defensive Pokemon and then smack them with either a Stab, Draco Meteor, or Hurricane, which both do a lot of damage. Of course, Hurricane does have the accuracy issue, but that's something different. Flygon will likely continue to be underwhelming, but it can check some of the faster Pokemon in the tier, like Jolteon, even without a Scarf a lot of times, since, for example, Jolteon likes to carry HP Grass a lot in the tier, just for things like Rhyperior. But with Seismitoad joining the tier now, HP Grass might be even more common, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Flygon also gets Defog, which gives it some decent utility and a helpful way to support its team as well. Kingdra will likely continue to use its Kridra Focus Energy set, although I kind of like the Dragon Dance personally, but that's just me. In RU, Amoonguss and Alomomola will be able to check the Dragon Dance set, really the Kridra set too. Kingdra can't do a whole lot, so I'm expecting Kingdra to not be too troublesome in the tier. I guess, again, we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. All three of the dragons are likely to stay and settle in RU. I don't expect them to rise back up anytime soon. And as far as dropping down to NU, Flygon would be the only one that I would guess maybe could, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Scrafty is the last drop from UU and probably the most dangerous of the bunch, excluding Mega Camerupt, of course. RU is a much slower meta overall, so Dragon Dance is a bit more viable now on Scrafty, and the defensive teams that you're bound to run into in RU can easily be destroyed by the bulk up set thanks to Shed Skin eliminating status like Burn and Toxic, and even T-Wave. Assault Vest is fairly good as well, especially with Intimidate, and that's probably my favorite set with Scrafty. And of course, knockoff support, regardless of what set you're running, is great for removing dangerous rocky helmets on things like Alomomola and recovery items like Lefties or Black Sludge. So I have no doubt that Scrafty will feel right at home in RU, and I'm not expecting it to move anymore after this. Last but not least, Seismitoad made the rise from NU, and this isn't surprising in the least because it was one of the best Pokemon in the tier, honestly. Despite not getting recovery, its bulk is deceptively impressive in addition to its decent offensive stats, resistance to rocks, good typing, immunity to Scald and other water type moves, and it can also set up rocks as well. I'm expecting it to fit well on a lot of teams, especially those that have wish support to, compensate for its lack of recovery, because Seismitoad's not going to be running rest, so it only has lefties otherwise. It will probably get paired with Amoonguss a lot, I'm guessing, just because of how well they synergize together defensively, because Seismitoad can take fire-type attacks, and Amoonguss very easily takes grass-type attacks that are aimed at Seismitoad. So, yeah, basically when it comes down to it, the Toad is not going anywhere. So with all that being said, that's going to be it for our discussion of the RU tier, so now it's time to move to NU. And you got a handful of interesting new toys from RU and PU this time around. One of them being regular Pinsir, which has finally made the fall after being stuck in OU for such a long time because of its Mega Evolution. Now this buggy is extremely dangerous with Moxie, Swords Dance, and Priority Quick Attack at its disposal. Poison types like Garbodor that you would think could possibly be a check to it aren't really. It's more like a soft check just because it does have Earthquake, which will hit hard, especially if it does have a boost behind it via Moxie or a Swords Dance. So Fire and Steel types that also might want to try to switch it on an X-Scissor could get smacked by an EQ as well. Once this thing gets going, I'm expecting this to be one of the hardest things to stop in the tier. You wouldn't think of it as a powerhouse, but trust me, this thing is incredibly dangerous. Moving on, Kabutops finally is returning to NU, which is great because seeing Sandslash on every team as a spinner has gotten pretty old. Honestly, nothing against Sandslash, but it's seriously on almost every team. Kabutops fell in usage in RU, again, thanks in large part due to Moltres being banned, but it's still great in NU for several roles. Aqua Jet is a great priority move to take out fast threats like Swellow, while Swords Dance can be used to boost its power output. Stone Edge, of course, is Stab and OHKO's most fire and bug types, although fire spam isn't as much of a thing with Typhlosion and Mega Camel gone, but that is a different story. Knockoff is always great for utility as well. And then, of course, there is Swift Swim with rain support, which is extremely scary also. Overall, it's great that Kabutops is back in NU, and I'm pretty excited about using it. So moving on again, we're going to go to Magneton now, which has fallen to NU as well. And this one kind of surprised me, to be honest. Personally, I use Mag even as high as OU, and a lot of you know that because I bring Magneton a lot in my OU battles. So it was a bit unexpected, at least for me, seeing that its usage had dropped so much. But this thing's going to be a monster in NU. I really do feel that way. Choice variants will be as dangerous as ever for steel types, but I also think that Eviolite sets will become a bit more common now, giving Mag extra bulk to take those hits and provide safe switches for its team with Volt Switch. Kling and Ferroseed are going to have some trouble with the Magnet Pull variants. Scyther will go down to Scarf variants. Mawile, with whether it's Swords Dance or not, is going to struggle against Eviolite Mag, especially if it has Magnet Pull. And things that are trying to switch in have to be wary of a potential analytic boosted attack, smacking them right in the face, which is not good, does not feel good. So this thing is going to be a threat for sure. Haunter and Prinplup are rising from PU as well, which it shouldn't be too surprising. Prinplup was a great answer to Typhlosion when it was in the tier, but it's still great against fire types in general, although there are things like Ninetales, which has Energy Ball, and Magmortar, which has T-Bolt, that you do have to be careful of. Aside from that, it can set up Stealth Rock, and it can also defog if necessary, so you know, it does support its team that way. It can also get some burns with Scald, so it's pretty good. Haunter is good at a few things with its good speed tier for NU at base 95. It has great offenses, surprisingly good offenses to be honest, combined with 3 immunities, and then it also has an immunity to Toxic, which could be very helpful as well because Steel types aren't too common in NU. Destiny Bond, of course, is a huge threat to setup sweepers because often you can just stop them right there. With a Destiny Bond, Will-O-Wisp neuters physical attackers, and of course its Stab, Shadow Ball, and Sludge Bomb hit very hard. It's not nearly as big of a threat as I think Magneton's going to be, but it makes sense to see both of these Pokemon rise. Tauros rose from BL4, and there really isn't too much to talk about here. Life Orb and Sheer Force makes Tauros a great wall breaker. Rock Climb gets the Sheer Force boost and keeps Tauros from taking recoil from Life Orb, and it dents anything that doesn't resist it, basically, or is immune to it, of course. Zed Headbutt destroys Sawk and Hariyama, EQ hits Magneton, Mawile, Kling for big damage, and Fire Blast stops Ferroseed from being able to counter it effectively. So not much to say from this monster, basically. Lastly, we have Fletchinder, which also dropped from RU. Things like Scyther, Pinsir, Sawk, Lilligant, and Hariyama are all checked by the bird, as priority acrobatics hit them for huge damage. Rock types like Regirock trying to switch in can easily be burned by Will-O-Wisp, and Priority Roost gives it plenty of opportunities to recover HP and kind of sort of make up for the fact that it can't carry Eviolites. So Fletch may be frail as well because of the fact that it doesn't have Eviolite, but it's easily one of the best revenge killers in the tier. So that pretty much wraps up the discussion here, but before we end this off, I should mention that I forgot 2 changes in particular. Whimsicott, for one, moved from RU to UU, and Sigilyph, or Sigilyph, however you want to say it, moved from BL3 to RU. Neither of those proves to be terribly impactful on the respective metas, but as far as Whimsicott is concerned, Prankster, Stun Spore, and Encore is of course very useful in stopping some of the dangerous UU threats like Salamence, Haxorus, Suicune, Cloyster, those types of things. And Sigilyph, on the other hand, benefits from Magic Guard as a status absorber and its ability to not take Life Orb damage, and it can serve as a decent check to the very common Amoonguss because it is weak to its stab. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video, as I ended up going into a little bit more detail than originally expected, but hopefully the extra info was a bit helpful. I encourage everyone to leave their opinions down in the comment section below regarding all of the changes, because discussion is good for everyone, and I'm sure that things can be brought up that I either didn't go over or didn't go into too much detail about, or I forgot about it or whatever. So with that being said, that'll be it for this time. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you're leaving a like rating or whatever you would like to do as always, and I will see you all next time. But until then, game on.